back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
It's good to see you here or hear you here.
It's good for you to hear us here because we can't hear whatever you're doing right now. You could be chewing some Pringles right now. We could not hear that.
My youngest son discovered gum the other day for the very first time. It was hysterical learning that he could put multiple pieces in his mouth at once. Watching him chew like a...
It's a quick slope downward with gum. I don't know if you remember gum in junior high or if it was the same with you, but it was pretty much the same as cigarettes in prison. It's the currency of middle school.
I was going to say, how many packs of gum you got?
Yeah.
You get an extra stick, bro.
My mommy bought me 2 packs this week. I'm the coolest kid in school.
Well, if we seem a little crazy, it's because we're in a little Easter hangover.
Yep.
Ryan, you've been mastering it up.
I'm almost a master.
Not only has it's the Tuesday after Easter, but it's also been a really high, like, academic kind of pull on you. You're finishing up your master's degree.
Yep.
You have a bunch of assignments due in like 10 days that you're finishing.
Yep.
Hopefully your professor's not watching this because you're way ahead. You're doing so good.
They're all done. I'm just sitting on it, honestly.
Yeah, I knew it.
I don't want to make anybody else feel bad about how late they are on theirs. I definitely don't have 2 books to read from the beginning and report on.
You did a fantastic job with, we kind of had the 40 days journey to the cross and the devotionals. Yeah,
the project included this is a more practical ministry degree, so that means I can't do a paper for my final project for my whole degree, which I would have loved to do. I love doing papers. Papers are my life. I wish I could do papers for this church and get paid for it, but I can't. But no, I don't. So I had to do a project, and so I did a 40-day devotional through the Gospel of Mark. From March 2nd all the way through April 16th. If you're adding those days up, it's more than 40, but we didn't include Sundays. That's called Lent, baby.
Yeah.
And anyway, but we didn't call it Lent. So I did those devotionals. I did a 6-week atonement class. If you want to know more about the atonement and some of the things that we talked about in there, you can check out episodes, those 3 that I just talked about.
Yep.
Was it like 68 and 69 are like 2 atonement ones back to back, and then maybe like
if you Google or you just look in the playlist, you'll find it. I looked at it before.
One's in the late 40s, early 50s, 2 are in the late 60s. Yep. It's in there. But it's a lot of that stuff for 6 whole weeks, hour and a half a week, and
it was a great class.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then Good Friday and Easter services, and not a part of that, but a part of my job here is new stage design, and we put out podcasts during that whole thing. I don't know how. And took a vacation in the middle of that, which didn't make any sense. Like a short little weekend vacation.
To the bustling metropolis of Indianapolis.
Man, there were people everywhere. I'm not used to that from St. Louis.
Yep.
It's about the same. It's just a less scary St. Louis.
I was going to say, there's just more blue than red. That's all it is, dude.
That's pretty true.
Not talking political either, just talking sports teams.
Yep.
Well, here's the thing. Today, we're getting into a little discussion. I'm excited about it because it's been something that, a healthy discussion, I should say.
Yeah.
A healthy discussion. And it all revolves around Easter, which is kind of a fun thing. Easter is kind of like the Super Bowl of pastors. It's kind of like the moment where like we've been playing football all year, but for whatever reason, this Sunday matters more. You know what I mean? It's like all of a sudden, like there's more people, more opportunity. It's kind of a special day. I used to feel a lot more pressure than I do these days. Like this Easter wasn't as pressure filled. Obviously, you had a lot going on, and this is only your second here. Been here long enough that I'm like, Easter's come and go. And
my first Easter here, I had been here a month, and then it was Easter, and I was like, ta-da. I'm still here doing the same stuff. But we had there was a person in our church who was talking to me about how they love Easters at Kingsway, and how they're always so big and spectacular and way different than all the other services. And I was like, yeah, is that right?
No pressure. Well, even against all odds, I felt like this year went really well. We had Mark and Angela play roles at the beginning and ending of service, and the band and your wife included did an amazing job in leading us through some great songs, and I felt like the message and the series tied together well through the last few weeks and really culminated in some neat moments. So communion was it was all around great. The thing that I always find curious about Easter is sometimes at Easter time, there is this like temptation to think that you need to reinvent the wheel of what like is being said or like how the gospel needs to be talked about. One of our core values here is we the method changes, but the
message doesn't.
But the message never does. So the idea is like the method has a shelf life, but the message never changes. And so the concept of like every Easter is that way. It's like, how do you package this up in a way that would choose to be, not even tolerable, but like heard and like understood in a fresh and real way. We chose to talk about table ministry this year and talk about I would talk about it as Jesus's primary way to engage with people.
When I first heard about that, I was like, I don't get it. But it's basically the table ministry is, think about the Last Supper. That kind of informs the Lord's Supper that we take every week at Kingsway. And I've been a part of churches who just recite what's called the words of institution, which is this is my body. I want to say broken for you, but I recently got into I almost said debacle, but into a debate with a guy I went to college with, mostly out of my own ignorance. He was like, his body wasn't broken. I was like, wasn't it? And they were like, no, you look through the scriptures. It never says broken. It's very important that his body wasn't broken.
It was just a gift. It was laid down.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. It matters. It does matter. And it's, I just like have not fully wrapped my head around it yet. But anyway, so he broke the bread and he passed out the juice, wine, whatever. And anyway, those are the words of institution from the Last Supper, Jesus' Last Supper.
Yeah.
With his disciples before his death. It's a Passover meal. Well, that's not the only meal he ever ate with anybody. And in fact, he used meals as a ministry, used tables as a ministry, so much so that the religious elites of his day were getting onto him about who he was eating with.
Yep.
Because as he would build relationships with tax collectors and sinners and other people, he would eat with them. And they were like, why are you even associating with these people? And like, that's a part of his ministry that I don't know if there's scriptural account for all of this, but like you think about a lot of his healings and miracles and whatever. Did he eat with those people afterwards? Probably, yeah, on at least some of them.
Well, in a lot of those cases too, it seems to be almost like the whole point of why he's there. Zacchaeus, I mean, just a good chunk of them. It's not even like a, hey, I guess we could eat. It's like no, I'm coming to your house and we're going to hang out.
Yeah, he calls Levi the tax collector, who's Matthew, the writer of the Gospel of Matthew, or according to Matthew. And then they go eat.
Yep.
At his house.
And I mean,
with his sinner friends.
His first miracle is around a feast. I mean, the wedding of Cana.
John
and so there's just a lot of things where you look back and you go, okay. And I really don't think it has, I mean, we obviously tied it to a table visually so people could see, but really what it was more talking about was just like this feeling of being accepted, valued, and seen, this feeling of being comfortable, of engaging and like being around each other at a place that's like, it feels good and it feels right. And it feels.
And what the table means. It's not, this is a Sunday about a slab of wood with 4 legs. It's a Sunday about what the table means. So we could have talked about Mephibosheth and how David invited the descendant of Saul to live with him and eat with him at his table and all those kind of things. But we talked about the other stuff about that and some of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances. He eats in most of them with the people he's with. Road to Emmaus, fish on the shore with John and Peter and whatever, and or somebody else, and meeting the 11 in the upper room when they were scared, and they have him eat something to show that he's a human and not a ghost, and some other stuff like that. And then the wedding supper of the Lamb in Revelation 19. What God is calling us toward is people see chapter 21, 22, and they're like, cool, a garden. Will we have to eat? But then like in the gardens, another tree of life, which bears fruit in all 12 seasons. Why is that important if you're not eating the fruit? And the leaves are for the healing of the nations. From a distance? No, this is probably applied. Maybe in a little salad with some balsamic vinaigrette or something. But
I love it.
Yeah, and it's so like this table idea is throughout all of Judeo-Christian history. Even I would even claim in the Tabernacle Temple it was set up to be God's dwelling place in the middle of his people. So the tabernacle's the tent. They're all out camping, and he has the biggest tent in the middle of the rest of the tents. And how is that tent set up? Well, it's got his fenced-in yard, the courtyard, and that has some sacrifice stuff in it. And then you go into the tent. What's in there? The table of showbread.
Yep.
That's like a dinner table.
Yep.
And the altar, the golden lampstand or something like that.
What is that called?
I'm not going to get this right.
No, I can't say it.
Are you thinking seraphim or cherubim?
No. I'm trying to think of the name of the candle holder, but I cannot think of it right now.
Yep, it's
that thing.
That one.
For Hanukkah.
Yep, the Hanukkah one. That's not totally true, but it's a little true. It's a little true. Anyway, they had some of those things in there. They're like things you would have in your house, but it's God's thing that you would have in his house. And anyway.
So it ties together so well. And I think what was so fun was, tying it together, the idea that God wants to invite you to the table, that you're invited to the table, that, this meeting of the wedding of the Lamb that's in 19 of the Revelation, but also just tying it to the prodigal son, tying it to this concept of like the acceptance that God is trying to make.
The prodigal son came back and what'd they do? Slaughter the fatted calf.
I mean, immediately had a feast.
Not for sport. It's for food.
So, I think it went really well, but that was our attempt to be creative, but it's always fun to look across, maybe it's some other churches or other preachers or other pastors, and one that popped up that is a good, I actually had someone else that referenced it to me, and then I ended up looking, which I'm a huge fan of this guy anyway, and I have been following him for years, but he has a little bit of I would say a hot take, and it's not a hot take because I think it's wrong. I just think it goes in the face of sometimes, especially at first, of some of the things that maybe we grew up in the Midwest not hearing. So try not to beat around the bush. Andy Stanley. So his Easter message, his Easter message was kind of a culmination, extension of a kind of a continuation of his book Irresistible.
So which was kind of controversial when it came out. I don't think it's controversial based on the actual content and meaning. Mm-hmm. That being said, I haven't read it. Trevor's read it, so we're not just talking about nothing here.
Nope.
But from what you said, from what I've understood, it's controversial based on how close it gets to meaning something it doesn't mean.
Yes, and how easily it can be ripped out of context, and how easily it can be used to vilify or become almost like a battleground for something that it was not intended to be. So
can you give me two things? Give me one, the premise of the whole book, like his whole argument, and then secondly, what people found controversial.
Yeah, so the premise of the whole book is the idea of what made the church irresistible was Jesus, not the Bible. And so the concept of why there was so many people that became Christians and why so many people followed Christ and became a part of the movement in the first and second centuries, when the church was at its hardiest, when it was at its best, as there was a lot of illiterate people that couldn't read, that didn't know a ton about, quote unquote religion, but knew about Jesus or knew someone that had seen Jesus come back from the grave. Yeah. And so the thing that was powerful about that he would say first, second, maybe even third century church was not the texts, but the testimonies. So he said, we don't believe in Jesus because John's gospel. We believe because John saw Jesus come back from the grave. Yeah. So it's not because we believe in the book of John. It's because we believe in the personal testimony of what John said.
Yeah. So that is the argument of his book. What kind of made the church good to follow, but you can hear what people had an issue with in there probably, which is, so you're saying the Bible doesn't matter or the Bible's untrue or the Bible's whatever. Yes.
So he is saying that the thing that people get upset about was he would say something like, you don't need the Bible to follow Jesus. And when people hear that, they're like, so the Bible doesn't matter or blah, blah, blah. And his immediate response would be, that's not what I said.
Yeah. Now, he's towing this line that I think is very valuable, but it's very slippery, and I don't think he's falling down it. But I think people are so like think the Pharisees. There were the actual laws and then the laws around the laws.
Yes.
And I feel like he's tripping one of the laws around the laws. Don't say anything bad about the Bible. It's inspired. It's great. That means that like it has this prominent place in our faith, and it has to.
Yep.
Well, what people forget is the printing press has only been around for 500 years. Before that, you went to the church to even hear the Bible.
Yep.
And you had no other way of hearing it other than memorizing it based on oral tradition and hearing it at church on Sunday and then trying to memorize what you heard and whatever. Like our ability to be close to the text is not what makes us Christians, because if it was, we'd have 1,500 years of people who did not have the ability to be Christians because they didn't have the ability to own a Bible and steep themselves in it the way that we can today.
Absolutely. And the main thing that, why he gets criticized is because of the slippery slope of like people feeling like the Bible is already discredited. It's already being critiqued and being kind of devalued by our culture.
Which, just to jump in here, maybe devalued by our culture, discredited. No,
I'm not saying people like to take the Bible and rip it apart. They like to take it.
But I just like, if you're hearing this and you're like, Trevor and Ryan are saying the Bible's untrue or made up or this or that person. First of all, stop watching the Da Vinci Code. Second of all,
no, it's good.
Like in terms of historical documents.
Oh, it's fabulous.
One of the most, if not the most, I think I'm saying one of the most because I want to cover my butt, but I'm 99% sure that it is the most well documented. Like, we have the most manuscripts of it from the earliest and closest to when it was written of any historical document on the face of the planet. Like,
especially that age.
It went through phases of it being a translation of a translation of a translation, but we have the original language. We have manuscripts from, it's depending on the different books in the Bible and fragments and whatever, within 50 or 30 years of some of the books of the New Testament, especially.
Easily within the first 100.
Yeah.
Easily thousands within the first 100.
That sounds kind of long, but
that's within one lifetime.
That's better than like Plato's Republic.
Mm-hmm. The Bible has incredible historical documentation, and I don't think that the historical documentation, when you go to the higher academic levels, you recognize that even people that don't believe in Jesus understand that the Bible is at least accurate to what it was originally supposed to say.
Yeah,
it at least is original to its language.
Hardest thing they can say is, I don't agree with the authors who wrote this. Or one of the other things that'll trip up people who say that, who want to believe that the Bible is 100% literally accurate on everything and nothing's ever been wrong, whatever. Another thing scholars might say is like, Paul didn't write this letter. His students wrote this letter based on the kinds of things he said and then attributed it to Paul.
Yeah.
I have like 40 books in my office that are essays in honor of this guy who died.
Yep.
And that's kind of like
that'd be a critique.
But those are like the hardest people can reasonably go against.
Yeah.
And when we say the Bible, there's 100
And the funny thing
there,
is, Andy, at least when I read his book, I've heard him talk about this several times. I've heard him defend himself, not in the sense of defending himself like, oh, I feel like I'm right and wrong, defending why he's choosing to do what he's doing, not just to be controversial. He's trying to say that even good-hearted Christians can put the Bible between a person that doesn't know Jesus and Jesus. Yeah. And he believes that is something that even Jesus would not want. Yeah. Where they have to believe in the Bible first in order to believe in him.
Now, that may seem dangerous. And when Trevor first told me this and I hadn't read the book, I had a bunch of stuff to fire back at that with. But after hearing him talk about the book, what we're saying is that the thing from Christianity, we want to sell you on first and primarily is that Jesus died and rose again.
Yes.
And then that he did that for you.
Yep.
What we don't want to sell you on first is Noah's flood, because first of all, that is thousands of years away from the most important thing that ever happened. Mm-hmm. And second of all, that doesn't really get you a lot closer to Jesus.
No.
Or like the 6-day literal creation, whatever. None of this is bad-mouthing you if you believe those things.
No.
But what saves you? What like brings you, to use our sermon series, to sit at the table with Jesus and to communion with God and those kind of things? It's not being like, I believe in Noah's flood.
Yes.
And then he's like, oh, I gotta let you in. He said Noah's flood. It's knowing Jesus. That's why. Okay, I hope I don't get in trouble for this. One of the things I heard when I was about youth group age, about the Bible. You know, Bible's an acronym, basic instructions before leaving Earth. Okay. The things that led me to, that affirmed in my idea about God and our faith and whatever, is that, one, basic instructions. So this is like rules, laws. That's the point of Christianity, is rules and laws. And then before leaving Earth, you have a ticket to leave Earth to go to heaven, or you don't. Which, like, to some extent is true, but I think ticket is like irrevocable.
Yep. I hold it.
You can't just like not have your ticket by being a little bad and whatever. Once saved, always saved, kind of like. And I, from a faith perspective, despise everything about those assumptions that I got from that. People talking about the Bible that way.
I think that makes exactly. I mean, that's just exactly what Andy is trying to go at, because North Point's vision, his church, is that they are a church for unchurched people.
Yeah,
that's the goal of their church, is to reach people that don't go to church, that haven't found Jesus, that don't know Jesus, and so they are constantly trying to remove what we would consider a tradition or something that is naturally common language for us, that on the in crowd, to remove it, to say no.
Remove insider language.
Yes. And so his thought process, and even ways that he's expanded on this concept, is he says things like, even when Jesus invited people to follow him when he was collecting disciples, he didn't ask them to believe in him. He just said, come and follow. And so the first thing they'll tell people is like, you don't have to believe everything we're saying, but why don't you follow Jesus for a little while and see if you don't see and recognize and pick up on what's actually going on.
To kind of summarize what we're saying here, and what we're summarizing about Andy Stanley here, is not that the Bible or the New Testament or any of that's bad or wrong or unhelpful or any of that, but it's that we're not trying to win people to the New Testament. We're trying to win people to the God of the New Testament.
Yep.
And so, like, God is the goal. It's not a pop quiz in purgatory.
Yes.
That we're trying to help you pass. And I talked to Trevor about this in a preaching planning meeting once, that that a lot of times we treat the head of the Trinity as God the formula, not God the Father. That we think that if we get baptized, that means we're saved and God's hands are tied. Or if we say, because we talk about salvation and baptize, and all you have to do is declare that Jesus is the Lord of your life. So you're like, okay, I declare it. Just like The Office, I declare bankruptcy. It's like, did that do anything on its own? No, but it should be what I hear some people talk about baptism as, an outward sign of an inward reality. But some people are like, I just need the outward sign. Then legally, God has to let me in. And every time you want to have one of those hand tie moments on God the Father and say that I think this principle or these string of words is more powerful than God himself, that's a little dangerous.
It's a little dangerous.
That's a little scary.
And I think the whole thought process too is that when I hear Andy's heart, and when he's been interviewed and talked about this, he is trying to put greater trust in the Holy Spirit. He's trying to put greater trust in the relational value that someone would have from meeting Jesus than the intellect they could gain from a book. And he's trying to say, like, I trust that if they come to know Jesus, they will see the value that the Bible brings. They will learn that there is more to life than just getting a ticket to heaven. That there's a greater understanding that there is a relational aspect rather than just a formula through a book. And he's pushing back twofold by saying these statements in my mind. He's trying to get you to the person of Jesus rather than convince you with logic. And he's trying to get you to the person of Jesus rather than the heritage of religion. And he's just, it comes off a little bit polarizing sometimes.
And it comes off a little bit how my dad or grandparents would say it, hippy dippy.
It does.
Like a little peace, love, and no war and whatever.
God loves you. It's okay. You know?
And you might be like, I'm a little skeptical of that. But what he's doing is taking seriously Jesus' warning that if you do miracles in my name and move mountains and perform exorcisms, you might come up to me at the end of time and say, Lord, Lord, and he'll say, I never knew you.
Yep.
Like, like we hear that and we're like, okay, lodge that away as the same importance as everything else I know about the New Testament, whatever. And my goal is going to be to do something else, to work on producing for God and knowing as much as I can and being an honorable person in Bible studies and whatever. But like Andy is preparing people to walk into eternity and know Jesus. For him, I would say the Bible is a medium through which you get to know Jesus better. It is not a litmus test for if you get into heaven.
Yep.
Litmus test for heaven is a formula. Getting to know Jesus is a father or a like interpersonal family relationship.
Yep.
We're talked about as adopted into God's family, and that's where the table metaphor comes in. But too many people are like, I just need to be good and do good.
Yeah, I need to memorize the test.
I need to score more good points like Mother Teresa and less bad points like Hitler, and then I'll get in.
Yep.
But then you have to ask, like, I don't even want to say this out loud, but is there the grace of God for Hitler if in his dying moments he like truly in his heart like repented from his war on the world, his extermination of Jews, his whatever.
I don't think
and truly submitted to the Lord. Like he probably didn't. But if he did, would God be like, nope, too many bad points?
If there's no hope for Hitler, there's no hope for me. I can just say,
yeah.
Like every single person, I think once they get to a certain level in their life, they recognize that their inability to follow to a degree that would be satisfactory to what the reward of heaven or what eternal life would be is so minute or so small. I mean, the real understanding of what intelligence is I don't know. you know, like, and I can just tell you the real understanding of what righteousness is when you realize you're not right.
Yeah.
All I'll say this can kind of wrap this thing up. Andy Stanley has always in my mind been somebody that I feel like has had an attitude of humility. He admits at times I've seen a lot of fallen heroes in the last 10 years. But what I love about even if Andy Stanley tomorrow had a moral failing and he slipped and I truly believe that he has created an understanding that grace of Jesus and the love of Jesus is what we all need, and that he has expressed that he himself needs it too. And not that he wouldn't lose influence and not whatever, but I feel like his message is not built on a look at me, look how great I am, or look what I've done. It's much more built on this personal humility that he tries to have with his relationship with Jesus. Just to give you a thought too, Andy is one of the most, he is not an idiot when it comes to the Bible. He knows the Bible backwards and forwards. He's an author. He knows Greek. He knows things that I don't even know.
Yeah, I think he has a doctorate in apologetics or something.
I mean, which guy is so smart.
It's partially why he's been on this crusade. He said in one sermon, but this wasn't an Irresistible, and I think he went back and was like, I don't know if I love that wording. But in one sermon, one of the things he said that became the tagline for his haters was, I want to unhitch Christianity from the Old Testament. What is he doing? He's saying that shouldn't be baggage for us, but that should be like a pantry for us. That when we're relating with God, when we're talking to people about God, we can go to that pantry and pull out what we need, but we're not dragging the Old Testament with us like it is necessary for salvation to believe this and that about certain Old Testament things, formulaically, whatever. He's an apologist at heart.
Yep.
Apologists are like rhetorical defenders of the faith, philosophical defenders of the faith.
Yes.
And like you can go down the apologetics rabbit hole, but what he's doing is smart. Because most Christian apologists who are worth their salt, worth their weight, worth their whatever, would try to sell you on Jesus and not argue about anything else at all. Because like you could argue about Noah's flood, and if you're right, and if Noah's flood didn't happen exactly the way that the...
Way to go. You still don't know Jesus.
That didn't disprove the thing that our faith stands on.
Yep. And that's one of my favorite aspects, and I've read several Andy Stanley books. I've lots of books. I've listened to him talk at conferences. Like I said, I'm a little bit of a fanboy, so it's hard for me a little bit to not be defensive. And I don't think he's infallible by any means. And I know he has come back and said several occasions that the terminology he needs to make sure is correct to be accurate to his theological beliefs. But one of the things he loves to study that I think gives him great insight is he loves to study people that lose their faith and read their autobiographies. He loves to read people that have become or are Christians and then become atheists, or are Christians and become, basically
something that's not Christian.
Something else. Most of the time they go to like being like a, kind of like a theist, rather than, and he loves to read those stories because in his mind, he feels like one of two things happens in those books. One, he sees the failings of the church, that they put something in place because he believes Jesus is irresistible when he's taught well. And then two, he believes that sometimes he sees how they've rejected Jesus, and he goes, that makes sense. They just don't like that they had to give up all their stuff, like the rich and ruler, it's just, you can see one, and he loves to read those because he feels like it's helpful for him to kind of understand how the gospel's power works and where the sacrifice or where the submission occurs or doesn't. Anyway, his Easter message is worth a listen. It really is. It's super simple, but it's super powerful.
The anything that ties to Irresistible in his Easter message is like faint and whispers between bigger points he's making. None of it's like,
no,
hey, stop reading the Bible. No. Also, Jesus, like, no.
I love, like, this Easter message has a great center point, and at the end of it, he has a line that he says, I wish every single person on this day could hear this. And that line's worth the whole sermon. Yeah. So, and that's right at the end. And so in my mind...
Do you remember it?
Do I remember it right now?
The line? I don't remember
it. Basically the line is, I wish each person could hear me and hear the truth, that God did not die so that you would believe in the Bible. Jesus came back from the grave so you would believe that he loves you. And so something along the lines of that. I think I'm paraphrasing.
You said earlier that you paraphrased it in a different way, that the early church didn't thrive because the Bible got popular.
Mm-mm.
They thrived because Jesus' message was irresistible.
Yeah. I think in my mind, as we've talked about being welcome to the table, as we talked about you mastering.
I've mastered mastery. I'm a master.
And then sometimes I think it's really healthy to recognize that the Easter message is that simple. Yeah. Someone came back from the grave who happened to be the Son of God, and he told us he was going to do it. And as Andy Stanley would tell you, if someone can predict their own death and then predict their own resurrection and pull it off, we should probably just do whatever they say.
Yeah.
And that's what he says is faith in Jesus. At its simplest point.
I want to share this because I saw it and I thought it was super cool. As we're talking about the importance and validity of the resurrection and whatever, this will be my last thought. I saw somebody post on Facebook a statement from Chuck Colson, who used to be big in the Republican Party or something, and an atheist or just not a Christian, and then had this like radical conversion to Christianity. And I hope this quote's true. But one of the big evidences for the resurrection is the disciples. How the 11 of them, because Judas killed himself, and then they elected a new one or whatever with the casting lots, and then Paul kind of became an honorary apostle or whatever. Anyway, all of them talked about this and held to it while being beaten and killed and imprisoned and watching their friends killed for this for 20 to 40 years. This is what Chuck Colson said. They stuck to their message for 20 to 40 years, the 12 of them. 13 maybe with Paul and the other guy. But the 12 guys in Watergate couldn't stick to their story for 3 weeks. And nobody beat them up. He was like, that's how I know the resurrection was true. Because those 12 to 13 guys stuck to their story for 40 years through like the worst persecution in anything ever. Like if it would take a lot to believe that.
All of them but John are martyred. All of them but John are martyred. And John almost has the worst because he's the one that lives on the island of Malta till he dies, and he
hears about and watches all his friends be killed.
Everyone die around him,
and they've all been beaten and imprisoned 100 times. And then he hears about them dying one by one. I think church history says that like some were boiled in oil, some were crucified upright, upside down, some were beheaded. And
in Josephus's work, he talks about the Colosseum and the Christians that are being killed in the Colosseum. It's one of my favorite things that Andy Stanley brings up, and it's the same exact point you just made. They weren't allowed to operate on dead bodies, so surgeons would have to wait outside the Colosseum gates till a man would be almost killed and on the throes of death. And they would have like 30 seconds to a minute to go out and cut people open and look at them to learn about the human body, because once they died, they were untouchable. And he said what happened is one of these surgeons recorded in his diary that Josephus is quoting.
Yeah.
And it's other theologians too. It's not just in one place.
Yeah.
But all of them have almost the exact same reaction, where they're dying, singing worship songs, praying with no fear, believing that God is going to waiting for them, and they're not fighting back, and they're dying with courage. And these young surgeons are just being blown away by the level of intensity that these people have towards their faith. And I think that's the type of witness that he's talking about. The Bible came together because these people believed what they did, and the testimony that they talked about, it was of an intensity that is of no literary measurement, if that makes sense. It has this value behind it, and he wants to make sure to remind people that this really happened, and it's not just a storybook. It's a real testimony of what Jesus did.
So that's pretty much what Andy Stanley is doing as an apologist, trying to base people's faith on the event of the resurrection and then supplement it with the Bible, rather than base it on how true and great the Bible's account of it is, because it's just a book from just some people. And he's saying the event is more important than the
text. And it's debatable, and I don't want to pretend like we have all the answers, but I think it's a really, really worthy conversation. Yeah. And I'm happy we had it today. I really am. Hey, give us a review or click the subscribe button.
Tell us if our podcast was irresistible.
Oh, man, I bet it was.
You just couldn't help but subscribe and follow it.
Hey, you guys have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you later.
See ya.